Welcome back to my roundtable this morning, which includes Congressional Representatives Miller, McCotter, Peters, and Clarke. Elect. We'll be obviously headed to Washington today, though, to start his orientation. Congressman Peters, let me let you weigh in on stimulus money and the government spending money to get to either prop things up, as it did in the case of the auto industry, or to get things moving again, as it tried to do with the stimulus package.
Well, to pick up on my colleagues about the help for the auto industry was absolutely essential. And we took a lot of heat. And talking about a caucus and about working in a bipartisan way, it was the Michigan delegation that really hung together. It wasn't about Democrats, it wasn't Republicans, it was about folks who understand the importance of manufacturing, the importance of having a domestic auto industry, that if you don't have a domestic auto industry, you can't have a domestic manufacturing sector, and without that, you're not going to have good paying middle class jobs. And so we fought very aggressively, and the president stepped up, and he took a lot of heat from around the country as well, and said it was the wrong thing to do. And I think it's pretty clear that it was a good thing we did do it. Chrysler is now showing good progress. General Motors just announced $2 billion of earnings, adding jobs up in Oregon, a plant in my district that's adding shifts and jobs. And had that not happened, those companies, because of with a fiasco on Wall Street, because of unbridled greed on Wall Street, they would have been the victims, and you would have seen millions of jobs lost across the country. Absolutely catastrophic for us here in Michigan. And now that money is being paid back to the taxpayers, and more importantly, jobs are in place. And in fact, the auto industry has added over 75,000 jobs in the last year.
Well, we'll move to an area where maybe there won't be quite the agreement inside the Michigan delegation. Congressman-elect Clarke, I think that from what you've said earlier, my hunch is that given the size of the deficit that we've mentioned, we're headed toward $1.3 trillion, $1.4 trillion. A lot of Democrats think that it's ridiculous to think that we need to continue or keep in place the Bush tax cuts, and that may be one of the first decisions you're asked to make.
Well, you know, that depends on how we would use that money if we allow those tax cuts to expire. You know, that debt is a huge problem, not only like with what Representative Miller talked about. It's a huge national security threat when you have China holding all of our debt and we owe money to them, but also too the interest.
Well, there's an old saying that if you know, if I owe you $100, I've got a problem. If I owe you $1 million, you've got a problem. So, but anyway, we'll leave foreign debt for another time.
But here's the problem though with that debt. Along with that debt though, just like your credit card debt, comes interest payments, which are huge. That money could be spent, invested to keep our schools open, to better train people in adult education, to help train Metro Detroiters for jobs that are already here in high demand, such as nurses that we go to Canada for, engineers that we hire them from India. So that's the problem. Yes, the debt and the deficit is huge. It's not sustainable, and I'm committed to work on a path to reduce that debt and deficit.
Congresswoman Miller, we recently heard no less than Ronald Reagan's former budget director saying we've got too many Republicans that he doesn't know what planet they're living on, who think that with a deficit of over $1 trillion that we can be talking about any kind of tax cuts, or that somewhere along the line we're going to need a tax increase.
Actually, if we don't extend the tax cuts, what we will be doing is a tax increase, and I think most economists would agree.
There's an interesting semantic argument over that.
Well, you know, really, that's really what it is. If we just extend them as they are, which I'm in favor of, I think we should extend them for every American just as they are. I don't think we should be looking at increasing taxes at this very, very tenuous time. Hopefully we're going to have some sort of recovery here, and I think most economists would agree that raising taxes on anybody, particularly those who are really the types of folks that would be stimulating the economy by creating jobs, etc., is the absolute worst thing that you can do. It's interesting, not only do the Republicans feel this, I hope Mr. Peters doesn't mind me mentioning, he signed a letter, and I think you had about 40 of your colleagues, Democratic colleagues, who said they were also in favor of extending the Bush tax cuts, as they call them. So yes, and you can clarify that. I don't want to speak for you. But at any rate, that I think we could have, if Speaker Pelosi, she'll still be the Speaker until 1st of January, if she would allow a vote of that in the lame duck, I think you would find, and I think it would pass.
Long term, however, Congressman McCotter, you could cut the entire defense budget out of the U.S. budget, and it would not be enough to cover this deficit. How in the world are we going to cut our way to $1.3 trillion?
Well, first, I think if you did that, the debt would be the least of your problems.
Well, of course. No, I'm just pointing out the size of it, though. But, of course.
What I'm pointing out is you need economic growth to sustain revenues. You need to expand the tax base, not the tax rate. When you raise the tax rate, you diminish the capital that is out there for the formation of jobs, for investment, especially from the very people who have the liquidity to do that. When you start to do that, what happens is your revenues go down. You're in a worse position than you were. We look at the examples that we see in Europe. We look at the example especially of Greece, which is on everybody's mind. I won't bring up the Irish because I don't want to be mean to my own people.
But similar situation.
But what you look at now, so the question is, do you then put in place a situation where the government has spent outrageous amounts of your money and then turns around and not gives tax relief, but allows tax increases to go into effect? We're not talking about additional tax cuts for people or tax breaks for people. We're talking about leaving in place the system we currently have rather than have it ratchet back up.
You think we can grow our way to $1.3 trillion?
You're going to have to do both.
Somewhere. Congressman Peters, let me let you jump in before I got to take a break.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point. And I'd say this is really a three-legged stool. You cannot cut your way out. You can't raise revenue enough. You can't get enough growth. It's going to take all three of those things. And I think it's important to put it in context of how big the deficit is now at $1.4 trillion. You mentioned cutting the defense. That's $700 billion. The discretionary.
So it would only get you halfway there, and obviously nobody wants to cut the entire defense budget.
And then all of the other discretionary spending that we deal with in Congress is another $500 billion. So if you cut all the discretionary spending and all the defense, you're at $1.2 trillion, which is not 1.4, which means the mandatory spending and the entitlements that are out there. And the American people have to understand that we're not going to cut all the defense, we're not going to cut all the discretionary, that you're going to need to look at cuts, you're going to need to look at revenue, and you're going to need to grow the economy. Certainly our priority has to be growing the economy right now, number one. But unless we put on the table both revenue and cuts, we're not talking the real world.
Let me get to another quick break. When we come back, what happens to health care now? This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Don't go away.